Homeless teen saves. Hell's Angel's daughter in the blizzard. What happened next will shock. Eulalia's eyes fluttered open in the darkness, her body instantly registering the familiar ache that came from another night on the hard wooden bench. The abandoned bus station creaked and moaned as wind pushed against its walls, a constant reminder of her precarious shelter. She sat up slowly, her muscles stiff from the cold. The thin blanket she'd found 2 weeks ago did little against the bitter winter chill, but it was better than nothing. Lila had learned to be grateful for small mercies. 4:15 in the morning. Her internal clock rarely failed her. Being able to wake before first light was a survival skill she'd perfected over months of homelessness. Yet the early hours belonged to people like her, the invisible ones, when they could move through the world without judgment or prying eyes. Lila folded her blanket with careful precision, tucking it into her backpack alongside her few possessions. A water bottle, a small notebook, a pencil worn to a stub, and a photo with creased edges that she never looked at but couldn't bear to throw away. Everything had its place. Order meant control, and control meant survival. She pulled on her second sweater, a faded blue one she'd found in a donation bin, over the gray one she'd slept in. Layers were essential. The temperature had dropped again overnight, and her breath hung visible in the dim light filtering through the station's boarded-up windows. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Another day, she whispered to herself, the sound of her own voice strange after hours of silence. Sometimes she spoke aloud, just to remember she could, to confirm she still existed in a world that had forgotten her. The bus station had been abandoned for years, left behind when the highway expansion made the old route obsolete. Most people avoided it, believing it to be condemned, which made it perfect for Lila. The roof leaked in 3 places, but she knew exactly where to position herself to stay dry. The north wall had a draft, but the ticket counter area provided decent shelter from the wind. She'd memorized every inch of her temporary home. Lila pulled a half-empty jar of peanut butter from her bag and scraped out a small portion with her finger. She allowed herself 1 tablespoon each morning, just enough to quiet the persistent hunger without depleting her supplies too quickly. Food needed to last. Everything was calculated, measured, rationed. After eating, she filled her water bottle from the melted snow she'd collected yesterday. The water was cold enough to make her teeth ache, but it was clean. Cleanliness was another rule she refused to break, even out here. She used a corner of her precious blanket to wipe her face, removing traces of sleep and grime. This morning ritual, this adherence to routine, was what kept her sane, what kept her human. The old station clock on the wall had stopped months ago, frozen at 3:22. Lila glanced at it as she did every morning, wondering what it would be like to be suspended in time like that. No forward motion, no backward slide, just stillness. But she couldn't afford stillness. The day ahead demanded movement, scavenging, survival. She shouldered her backpack and moved toward the small gap between the boarded-up entrance doors, her private entrance that no one else knew about. Outside, the winter landscape was painted in shades of gray and blue, the sun still hiding below the horizon. The cold hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath for a moment before she adjusted. The weather report she'd overheard at the library yesterday had warned of a storm coming. Looking at the heavy clouds gathering in the distance, Lila knew she needed to prepare. Her day unfolded as most did. Careful movement through town, invisible to most passers-by, collecting what she needed without being noticed. She checked the dumpster behind the bakery at 6:30, but just after they threw out yesterday's unsold goods. She found half a loaf of sourdough, only slightly stale. A treasure. At the public restroom in the park, she washed quickly, the cold water painful against her skin. She brushed her teeth with the frayed toothbrush she guarded carefully, applied deodorant, and changed her socks. Clean socks mattered when your feet were your only transportation. By afternoon, the wind had picked up considerably. Lila hurried back to the bus station, watching the sky darken not just with approaching night, but with the promised storm. The temperature dropped steadily as she made her way along back roads and through empty lots. Inside the station once more, she secured the loose board over the broken window that always rattled during high winds. Outside, the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, but quickly transforming into a swirling white curtain that obscured everything beyond a few feet. As evening fully descended, the blizzard unleashed its fury. The wind howled through every crack in the old building, and Lila wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Through the small gap between the boards on the window, she noticed distant headlights struggling through the storm, moving erratically on the old highway. The wind screamed like a living thing as night descended fully over the abandoned bus station. Lila huddled deeper into her corner, pulling her blanket tight around her shoulders. The temperature had dropped even further, and the walls seemed to bend inward with each powerful gust. Snow piled against the boarded windows, creating an eerie, muffled quality to the howling outside. Where the old building groaned under the assault of the blizzard, and Lila found herself counting the seconds between each creak, a rhythm that somehow made the storm more bearable. "Just hold together," she whispered to the walls. After months of sheltering her, they had become something like friends, unreliable and flawed but familiar. The distant headlights she'd spotted earlier had disappeared, swallowed by the white curtain of snow. Lila hoped whoever was driving had reached safety before the worst hit. Not many people ventured out on the old highway these days, especially in weather like this. She nibbled on the edge of the sourdough bread she'd salvaged earlier, making each bite last. The simple pleasure of food was one she never rushed. When every meal was uncertain, you learned to appreciate each one. But the crash came suddenly, metal tearing, a skidding sound followed by impact. Even through the howling wind and the thick walls of the bus station, Lila heard it clearly. The sound echoed across the empty landscape, unmistakable. She froze, bread halfway to her mouth, listening. Seconds passed. No more sounds followed. Lila's mind raced. Someone had crashed not far from her shelter. The reasonable thing would be to stay put. The storm was deadly. Venturing out meant risking her own life. Besides, she had survived this long by avoiding other people's problems. But what if someone was hurt? She closed her eyes, fighting with herself. The memory of her own pleas for help, ignored by passing strangers months ago when she'd first found herself alone, flashed through her mind. "This is stupid," she muttered, but she was already stuffing her few possessions into her backpack. She pulled on her second pair of socks, laced her boots tight, and wrapped her scarf around her face until only her eyes remained exposed. The gap between the front doors felt narrower than usual as she squeezed through, as though the building itself was trying to keep her inside. The moment she stepped out, the full force of the blizzard hit her. The wind nearly knocked her backward, and snow pelted her face like tiny needles. Lila bowed her head and pushed forward, using her arm as a shield against the stinging assault. She oriented herself toward where she thought the sound had come from, somewhere along the curve of the old highway that ran past the bus station. Each step was a battle. The snow had already accumulated to mid-shin level, and the wind kept changing direction, disorienting her. Lila kept one hand extended, feeling her way forward when visibility dropped to almost nothing. 10 minutes of struggling brought her to the road's edge. She paused, listening hard over the wind. Nothing. Had she gone the wrong way? The darkness and snow made everything unfamiliar. Then she saw it, a faint red glow to her right. Taillights, partially buried in snow. Lila pushed toward them, stumbling down the slight embankment. The car had skidded off the road and plowed into a ditch, its front end crumpled against a tree. Snow was already piling around it, threatening to bury the vehicle completely if the storm continued much longer. "Hello," Lila called, but the wind stole her words. She approached cautiously, years of wariness making her hesitate before touching the vehicle. One of the driver's side window was shattered, but no one sat behind the wheel. Moving to the passenger side, she cleared away snow from the window and peered inside. The interior light was somehow still working, casting a weak glow that revealed a small figure slumped in the back seat. A child. Lila's heart lurched. She tried the door and found it unlocked. Opening it released a rush of warmer air from inside the car that was quickly stolen by the wind. It was a girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, still strapped into her seatbelt but unconscious. A thin trickle of blood had dried on her forehead. Lila reached in, pressing gentle fingers against the child's neck, relieved to find a pulse. "Hey," she said softly, then louder. "Can you hear me?" The child didn't respond. Lila looked around frantically for an adult, a parent. Anyone? But there was no one. Just this small, vulnerable girl alone in a wrecked car in the middle of a blizzard. The car's heat was already fading. The temperature inside would soon match the killing cold outside. Lila knew she had only minutes to make a decision, but really, there was no choice at all. This child would die without help. Lila reached into the back seat, her fingers already stiff with cold. The little girl's skin felt too cool to the touch. Not good. The wind howled outside, throwing snow against the car in angry bursts. Time was running out for both of them. "I've got you," Lila whispered, though she knew the child couldn't hear her. She fumbled with the seatbelt, her trembling fingers struggling with the buckle. After 3 tries, it finally released with a click. The girl slumped forward, and Lila caught her. She was so small, so fragile, probably not much more than 60 pounds. Dark hair framed a pale face, peaceful in unconsciousness, unaware of the danger she was in. Lila carefully pulled the child into her arms, cradling her against her chest. For a moment she paused, overwhelmed by how helpless the girl looked. A memory flashed through her mind. Her own mother's face, distant and blank, walking away for the last time. Lila had been 13 then, old enough to understand abandonment but too young to survive it easily. "Not happening to you," she muttered through clenched teeth. "Not tonight." She awkwardly maneuvered out of the car with her precious cargo, immediately feeling the full force of the storm. The wind slapped her face like an open palm, stealing her breath. The snow swirled around them in a dizzying dance that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Lila hunched her body protectively around the girl. The bus station was too far. They'd never make it in this weather. She needed somewhere closer. Through squinted eyes, she scanned the darkened landscape and spotted a shape not far from the road. A small structure, maybe an old tool shed or maintenance building. She started toward it, each step a battle against the wind that seemed determined to push her backward. The snow had deepened in just the short time she'd been outside, now reaching halfway up her calves. Every footfall required lifting her leg high and plunging it down again, like walking through wet cement. "Keep going," she told herself, the words lost in the wind. "Non, just keep going." The girl in her arms felt heavier with each step. Lila's muscles screamed in protest, but she refused to stop. Her own survival had taught her that giving up meant dying, and now she carried double the reason to keep fighting. Halfway to the shed, her foot caught on something buried beneath the snow, and she stumbled forward. Lila twisted her body mid-fall, taking the impact on her shoulder and side to protect the child. Pain shot through her arm, but she barely registered it. The cold was beginning to numb everything anyway. She struggled back to her feet, readjusted her grip on the girl, and pressed onward. The structure grew larger as she approached. Definitely a maintenance shed of some kind, abandoned like everything else in this forgotten corner of nowhere. The door hung slightly ajar, but banging rhythmically against the frame with each gust of wind. Lila shouldered it open wider and ducked inside. The interior was pitch black and smelled of dust and old motor oil, but it was out of the wind. She carefully set the girl down on the floor and fumbled in her pocket for the small flashlight she always carried. The beam revealed a cluttered space, shelves with rusted tools, an old workbench, and what looked like a stack of canvas tarps in one corner. Not much, but it would have to do. Lila quickly gathered the tarps and spread one on the floor, then gently moved the girl onto it. She wrapped another around the child's small body, tucking it carefully around her. The girl's breathing seemed shallow but steady. The cut on her forehead wasn't bleeding anymore, which was something to be grateful for. Lila used the corner of her scarf to gently wipe away the dried blood. "You're going to be okay," she said, though she had no way of knowing if that was true. "I'm not leaving you." Outside, the wind screamed louder, finding every crack and seam in the shed's walls. Frigid air seeped in from all sides. It wasn't much warmer in here than outside, but at least they were sheltered from the direct assault of the blizzard. Lila's body suddenly felt impossibly heavy. The adrenaline that had carried her through the rescue was fading, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. She sank down beside the girl and pulled the last tarp over both of them, creating a small tent of fabric that might trap what little body heat they had. She pulled the child close against her chest, hoping to share whatever warmth remained in her own body. And the girl's face was still too pale, her skin too cool. "Don't you give up," Lila whispered, pressing her cheek against the top of the girl's head. "And I won't either." Lila shivered as the wind found another crack in the shack's walls. The girl beside her hadn't stirred, and her skin remained frighteningly cool. They needed warmth. Real warmth, or neither of them would make it till morning. She forced her stiff body to move, crawling around the small space, searching the shadowy corners with her flashlight. Near the workbench, she discovered a rusty metal trash can and, miraculously, a half-empty bag of charcoal briquettes. "Thank you," she whispered to no one in particular. In another corner lay a jumble of broken wooden pallets. Perfect. Using the last of her strength, Lila broke apart the dry wood, but splintering the boards with her heel when her frozen fingers couldn't manage the task. She arranged the wood and a few briquettes in the trash can, creating a makeshift fire pit. From her pocket, she pulled out her most precious possession, a cheap plastic lighter. It had saved her life more times than she could count. The flame sputtered weakly at first. Lila cupped her hands around it, protecting the tiny spark from drafts. She added scraps of paper found on the workbench, gently blowing until the kindling caught. The fire was small but determined, much like Lila herself. She dragged the girl closer to the warmth, then unwrapped her own threadbare blanket from her backpack, the one thing she never left behind. It wasn't much, just a faded blue cotton thing with frayed edges. But it was clean and dry, oars which made it priceless on a night like this. "Here you go," she said, wrapping it snugly around the child. "This'll help." The girl's face looked peaceful, almost like she was just sleeping, but Lila knew better. She'd seen enough on the streets to recognize when someone was in trouble. The fire cast flickering shadows across the small face, highlighting cheeks that should have been rosy with warmth, but remained pale. "Hey," Lila said, gently tapping the girl's cheek. "Can you hear me? You need to wake up." No response. She rubbed the girl's hands between her own, trying to stimulate circulation. "Come on, kid. Don't do this." Still nothing. Lila pulled the child onto her lap, cradling her close to share body heat. The fire helped, but the shack was still desperately cold, the wind finding every gap in the weathered boards. You know what?" Lila said, her voice deliberately bright in the gloom. "I think you need a story. My mom used to tell me stories when I couldn't sleep." It had been years since Lila had thought about those bedtime stories, from before everything fell apart, before her mother's eyes grew distant and empty. But now the memories came back with surprising clarity. "Once upon a time," she began, her voice soft but steady, "there was a brave princess who lived in a beautiful castle. Everyone thought she had everything she could ever want, but the princess had a secret. She was lonely." Lila adjusted the blanket, tucking it more securely around the small shoulders. One day, the princess found a magic key in the garden. It was small and silver and seemed to glow in the moonlight. She knew it must open something special. As she spoke, Lila watched the girl's face intently, looking for any sign of awareness. The story meandered on, about magic doors and hidden gardens, brave deeds and loyal friends. She wasn't even sure if the words made sense anymore. Exhaustion clouded her thoughts, making it hard to follow her own narrative. But she kept talking anyway, her voice the only sound besides the crackling fire and the howling wind. And then the princess realized that the real magic wasn't the key at all. It was... A small cough interrupted her. The girl's eyelids fluttered. Lila's heart leapt. "Hey there," she said gently. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyes opened halfway. Dark brown eyes, confused and unfocused. Her lips moved, forming words too soft to hear. "What's that?" Lila leaned closer. "Can you say that again?" "My dad," the girl whispered, but her voice barely audible. "My dad will come for me." Something twisted in Lila's chest, a mixture of hope and doubt. How many times had she told herself the same thing in those first terrible weeks after her mother left? How long had she waited, watching doors and windows, certain that someone would come looking for her? No one ever had. "Sure he will," Lila said anyway, smoothing the girl's hair back from her forehead. "I bet he's looking for you right now." The child's eyes closed again, her body relaxing as she drifted back into unconsciousness. But her breathing seemed stronger now, more regular. The faintest hint of color had returned to her cheeks. Outside, the storm raged on, battering the small shack with relentless fury. Lila added another piece of wood to the fire and settled in for a long night, knowing sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not when the girl's life depended on her staying awake, keeping the fire going, maintaining their fragile hold on survival. She pulled the child closer and continued her story in a whisper, the words flowing into the darkness like a lifeline connecting them both to morning. Dawn crept across the sky in pale streaks of pink and gold, barely visible through the small, grimy window of the shack. The blizzard had softened overnight, though snow still fell in lazy spirals. Inside, the makeshift fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting just enough warmth to keep the worst of the chill at bay. Lila's eyes burned from staying awake all night. Her throat felt raw from hours of storytelling, and every muscle in her body ached from sitting in one position for so long. But none of that mattered when she looked down at the little girl in her arms. Color had returned to the child's face. Her breathing was steady and strong, no longer the shallow gasps of the night before. Lila carefully placed her hand on the girl's forehead, warm but not feverish. "Hey," Lila whispered, gently shaking the child's shoulder. "Can you hear me?" The girl's eyelids fluttered, then opened. Those deep brown eyes looked clearer now, more focused as they took in Lila's face and the unfamiliar surroundings. "Where am I?" Her voice was small but steady. "You're safe," Lila said, helping her sit up. "There was an accident. Do you remember anything about it?" The girl's forehead wrinkled as she thought. "We were driving. It was snowing really bad. The car started sliding." She looked around in sudden panic. "Where's my dad?" "I only found you," Lila explained gently. "You were alone in the car." "He must be looking for me." The certainty in the child's voice made Lila's heart twist. "He wouldn't leave me." "What's your name?" Lila asked, changing the subject. "Sophie." The girl pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I'm 8. Who are you?" "I'm Lila." She added another piece of wood to the fire. "Are you hungry? I've got a little food in my bag." Sophie nodded, and Lila dug into her backpack. She pulled out a slightly squashed granola bar and a half-empty bottle of water. Not much, but it was all she had. "Here," she said, breaking the bar in half and handing the larger portion to Sophie. "Eat slowly, okay?" As Sophie nibbled on the granola, Lila moved to the window and wiped away some of the grime. But the world outside was a blinding white, the snow having transformed the landscape overnight. The road was barely visible, marked only by the tops of fence posts poking through the drifts. "Do you know where we are?" Sophie asked between careful bites. Lila shook her head. "Not exactly. There's an old bus station about a mile that way." She pointed. "That's where I was when I heard the crash." "You came out in the storm to find me?" Sophie's eyes widened. "Like a superhero." Lila felt her cheeks warm. "I'm no hero, kid. Just happened to be in the right place." "My dad says heroes don't always wear capes." Sophie finished her half of the granola bar. "Sometimes they just do the right thing when it's hard." Something about the simple faith in the girl's voice made Lila's throat tighten. She turned away, pretending to check the fire. "Oh, your dad sounds pretty smart," she managed to say. "He is. And strong, too. He rides a motorcycle with his friends." Pride filled Sophie's voice. "He has a leather jacket with wings on the back." Lila's stomach dropped. Wings? Like the kind worn by motorcycle gangs? She'd learned to steer clear of those types on the streets. "Wings, huh? That's interesting." "They help people, even though they look scary sometimes." Sophie stood up, wobbling slightly. "Can we go find him now?" "You should rest more," Lila said quickly. "You had a rough night. But my dad, we'll have a better chance of finding you if you stay put." Lila tried to sound confident. "Plus, it's still snowing. We're safer in here for now." Sophie reluctantly sat back down, and Lila returned to the window. The snow was definitely letting up, on sunlight occasionally breaking through the clouds. Maybe later they could try to make it back to the bus station, where they'd have better shelter and a clearer view of the road. A faint sound cut through her thoughts, a distant rumble that wasn't thunder. It grew louder, mechanical, and purposeful. Sophie shot to her feet. "That's them! I know that sound!" Before Lila could stop her, Sophie was at the door, tugging it open. Cold air rushed in as the child stepped onto the rotting porch, waving her arms above her head. The rumble became a roar, and through the swirling snow, Lila made out dark shapes approaching on the road. Motorcycles, 3, then 5, then more, plowing determined paths through the drifts. The riders were bundled in heavy leather, faces hidden behind helmets and scarves, looking more like winter warriors than typical bikers. They spotted Sophie immediately. The lead rider gunned his engine, veering off the road towards the shack. The others followed, surrounding the small building in a semicircle of growling machines. Lila stepped protectively in front of Sophie as the engines cut off. The silence that followed felt oppressive, broken only by the sound of boots crunching through snow as the lead rider dismounted. Lila's heart hammered in her chest as the lead rider approached the shack. He was massive, at least 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to fill the doorway. Snow clung to his thick beard, and his weathered face was lined with worry and something darker. A hardness that came from years of tough living. "Get behind me," Lila whispered to Sophie, but the little girl had other plans. "Daddy!" Sophie cried out, darting past Lila and stumbling through the snow toward the man. The biker froze in his tracks. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, with surprising speed, he closed the distance and swept Sophie up in his arms, clutching her to his chest as if she might disappear. "Sophie," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank God." 2 more bikers approached the shack, flanking their leader as he carried Sophie inside. Lila backed away until her shoulders hit the wall, eyes darting between them. They filed in one by one, filling the tiny space with the smell of leather, exhaust, and cold air. "You the one who found my daughter?" the leader asked, fixing his intense gaze on Lila. She nodded, chin raised despite her fear. "She was in a wrecked car about a quarter-mile from here. Unconscious." The man studied her for a long moment. Up close, Lila could see the patch on his leather jacket, a winged skull with the words "Hell's Angels" curved above it. Her mouth went dry. She'd heard stories about these guys, none of them comforting. "I'm Marcus," he said finally. "These are my brothers." He nodded toward the other men who had crowded into the small shack. One of them, a heavy-set man with a bushy gray beard, stepped forward. "We've been searching all night, riding through that hellish storm. Car went off the road when the blizzard hit. By the time we doubled back, the snow had covered everything." "I thought you were gone," Sophie said, her face buried in her father's neck. "But I knew you'd find me." Marcus's arms tightened around his daughter. "Always, baby girl." His voice was softer now, a stark contrast to his intimidating appearance. His gaze returned to Lila, taking in her worn clothes, the dark circles under her eyes, the wariness in her posture. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, of someone else who knew about survival. "You look half frozen yourself," he observed. "How long have you been out here?" Lila shrugged. "I'm fine." "She stayed awake all night to keep me warm," Sophie piped up. "And she gave me her blanket and told me stories so I wouldn't be scared." Marcus looked at the dying fire, the single blanket now draped around his daughter, and the small backpack that clearly contained everything Lila owned in the world. His jaw tightened. "You saved my daughter's life," he said simply. Another biker, younger than the rest, whistled low. "In this weather? One must have been one hell of a trek from that wreck." Lila didn't respond, keeping her eyes on Marcus. She'd learned that in any group, you watched the one in charge. "What's your name?" Marcus asked. "Lila." "Lila?" he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "You got somewhere to be, Lila?" The question caught her off guard. "I've got a place," she lied. The abandoned bus station hardly qualified, but these men didn't need to know that. Marcus shifted Sophie to his hip, her small arms wrapped around his neck in complete trust. The contrast between his rough exterior and the gentleness with which he held his daughter was striking. "You're a terrible liar," he said, but there was no malice in his voice. "No one with a place spends the night in a shack like this in the middle of a blizzard." Lila stiffened. I don't need your help." "Didn't say you did." Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "But my little girl is alive because of you. That puts me in your debt." He looked around at the dilapidated shelter, then back at Lila's thin frame and exhausted eyes. Something in his expression broke, revealing a glimpse of raw emotion beneath the hardened exterior. "We've got a clubhouse about 20 miles from here," he said. "Warm food, hot shower, no questions asked." Lila hesitated, every instinct telling her to refuse. "Please come with us," Sophie said suddenly. "Daddy makes the best pancakes." A ghost of a smile flickered across Marcus's face. "She's right about that, at least." Lila looked from father to daughter, weighing her options. The bus station would be cold and empty. Her food was gone. And despite her wariness, something about Marcus's straightforward offer felt genuine. "Just for a meal?" she conceded finally. "Then I go my own way." Marcus nodded, respecting her terms. "Fair enough." He turned to his men. "Let's move out before the weather turns again." As they prepared to leave, Marcus paused at the doorway, Sophie still in his arms. He looked back at Lila with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Thank you," he said simply. "For my daughter." The motorcycle roared beneath them as Lila clung to Marcus's leather jacket. She'd never ridden on one before, and the speed made her stomach lurch with each turn. The cold bit at her face despite the helmet he'd insisted she wear. "You doing okay back there?" Marcus called over his shoulder, his voice barely audible above the engine and wind. "I'm fine," Lila answered automatically, the word she always used regardless of how she actually felt. The storm had eased, leaving behind a world transformed by white. They rode in a formation, 2 bikes ahead, 3 behind, cutting through the snow-covered roads with surprising ease. Lila watched the landscape blur past, wondering for the 100th time if she'd made a terrible mistake. After 20 minutes, that felt much longer. They turned onto a gravel road that led to a large, warehouse-like building with smaller structures scattered around it. A tall chain-link fence surrounded the property, topped with barbed wire that glinted in the weak winter sunlight. "Home sweet home," Marcus said as they passed through gates that were quickly closed behind them by men with guns visible at their hips. Lila's grip tightened involuntarily. But what kind of place needed that kind of security? They pulled up to the main building where the words Hell's Angels MC were painted across the front in bold red letters. Sophie, who had ridden with one of the other men, jumped off and ran toward the entrance with the energy only a child could muster after such an ordeal. "Come on," she called to Lila. "I want to show you my room." "Easy there, kiddo," Marcus said, dismounting and lifting his helmet off. "Lila needs to warm up first, and so do you." The inside of the clubhouse was nothing like Lila expected. Yes, there were motorcycle parts scattered about, a bar running along one wall, and the distinct smell of cigarettes hanging in the air. But there were also comfortable-looking couches, a massive fireplace with flames crackling, and, most surprisingly, a Christmas tree in one corner, decorated with colorful lights and mismatched ornaments. "The guys like to celebrate," Marcus explained, catching her stare. "Most of them missed out on normal holidays as kids." Lila nodded, not sure what to say. She remained standing near the door, taking in the room and its occupants. Several men and a few women moved about, some nodding respectfully to Marcus, others calling out greetings. No one approached her directly, but she felt their curious glances. "Bathroom's down the hall if you want to clean up," Marcus said, pointing. "Sophie, show her where the guest room is after. I need to talk to the boys." Sophie grabbed Lila's hand with trusting ease. "It's this way. There's hot water and everything." The bathroom was surprisingly clean, with actual towels and soap. Lila stared at herself in the mirror. Dirty face, matted hair, but hollow cheeks. The girl looking back at her seemed like a stranger. 20 minutes later, face washed and wearing a too large sweatshirt Sophie had proudly produced from somewhere, Lila followed the smell of food to a large kitchen where Marcus stood at the stove, flipping pancakes just as his daughter had promised. "Sit," he said without turning. "Food's almost ready." She perched on a stool at the counter, watching his large hands move with surprising skill as he worked. The kitchen was industrial-sized but homey, with drawings stuck to the refrigerator, all signed by Sophie in crayon. "Chocolate chip or blueberry?" he asked, finally glancing her way. "Either is fine," she replied. "That's not an answer." There was no anger in his voice, just calm insistence. Lila hesitated. "Or chocolate chip?" He nodded and slid a plate toward her. 3 perfect pancakes stacked high, melted butter dripping down the sides. Her stomach growled audibly, and for once she didn't try to hide her hunger. She ate while Marcus continued cooking, occasionally asking simple questions that required minimal answers. Where was she from? Originally, Michigan. How old was she? 17. Did she need anything else? No. He didn't press when she deflected, didn't push for details when her answers grew vague. By the time Sophie joined them, Lila had cleaned her plate and accepted a second helping without argument. The day passed in a blur of warmth and rest. Sophie showed her around the compound, chattering endlessly about her toys, her friends, her dad's motorcycle. Then Marcus disappeared for several hours but returned with clean clothes in Lila's size, which he handed over without comment. As night fell, the clubhouse grew rowdier, with music playing and more members arriving. Marcus showed Lila to a small but private room with a real bed and a lock on the door. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll talk more tomorrow." Lila nodded, closing the door behind him. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the softness beneath her fingers. It had been months since she'd slept on anything but benches or concrete, but as comfortable as the bed looked, as warm and safe as this strange place felt, she couldn't stay. There were others who needed her, who depended on her, and besides, getting comfortable anywhere was dangerous. Comfort led to trust, and trust led to disappointment. She waited until the sounds outside quieted, until the hallway lights dimmed and the last motorcycles rumbled away. Then she packed the clean clothes Marcus had given her, left the sweatshirt folded neatly on the bed, and slipped out through her window, into the cold night. Lila's breath clouded in front of her face as she slipped through the shadows behind Marcus's clubhouse. The night air bit at her skin, a harsh reminder of the world she truly belonged to. Still, her steps were quick and purposeful, not stumbling or uncertain. This was a journey she'd made many times before, just from a different starting points. Tucked inside her jacket were several napkin-wrapped bundles, pancakes, leftover sandwiches, and even a few cookies she'd managed to grab from the kitchen while everyone was distracted. The food pressed against her chest, when still warm. Her fingers, already growing numb, clutched a half-empty bottle of water she'd filled from the tap. She knew she should feel guilty for taking the food, but the faces waiting for her wouldn't allow that luxury. Hunger was a monster she understood too well, and tonight, at least, she had something to fight it with. The moon hung bright and cold in the sky, casting enough light for her to navigate without a flashlight. Every few minutes, she stopped to listen, making sure no one followed. The clubhouse had been surprisingly easy to escape. Whatever these bikers were, dangerous men, criminals perhaps, they hadn't expected her to run. Somehow, that made leaving harder. Lila shook away the thought. Attachment was dangerous. Kindness always came with strings. After walking for nearly 30 minutes, she reached the edge of town where abandoned buildings stood like decaying teeth in a forgotten smile. This area had once been an industrial district, but now it was just a collection of empty warehouses and collapsed dreams. Most people avoided it, which made it perfect for those who needed to disappear. Lila approached a particular building, once a textile factory according to the faded sign, and circled to the back. A small hole in the fence provided just enough space for someone thin to squeeze through. She did so expertly, barely snagging her clothes. The factory's rear loading dock had a door that appeared securely chained from the outside, but Lila knew better. She slipped her hand through a gap in the wall beside it and pulled a hidden piece of wire that released the false lock. The door opened with a soft creak. "It's me," she called softly into the darkness. For a moment, nothing happened. Then shuffling sounds emerged from various corners of the vast space. Shadows moved, becoming people, young, thin, watchful. "Lila?" A boy's voice, cracking with adolescence. "We thought maybe you weren't coming back." "I always come back, Trent," she said, stepping fully inside. They materialized from their hiding spots. 5 teenagers, the oldest maybe 16, the youngest barely 13. All of them wore layers of mismatched clothing, their faces smudged with dirt, but eyes alert and wary. "Where were you?" A girl with tangled blonde hair moved closer, hugging herself against the cold. "Helping someone," Lila said simply. She didn't mention the crash or Marcus. These kids had enough worries without adding biker gangs to the list. But I brought food." That was all it took. They gathered around her as she carefully unwrapped her treasures. She'd been collecting these kids for months, finding them one by one on the streets. Trent, after his mother overdosed. Danny, running from foster care. The twins, Alex and Jamie, whose parents had kicked them out for being gay. And Mia, the youngest, whose story Lila still didn't fully know. "Real pancakes?" Jamie's eyes widened. "With chocolate chips?" Lila nodded, breaking the stack into somewhat equal portions. "Take it slow," she warned as they reached for the food. "Small bites. Make it last." She watched them eat, making sure everyone got a fair share. They were getting thinner, she noticed. Winter was always hardest. The factory kept out some of the wind, but nothing could truly keep out the cold. "Where did you get all this?" Alex asked between careful bites. "Someone gave me a place to stay for the night," Lila said. "They had extra." "Someone nice?" Mia's small voice sounded hopeful. Lila hesitated. "Someone grateful," she said finally. "I helped their kid." She didn't mention that she was supposed to be sleeping in a warm bed right now, with clean sheets and a locked door. She didn't say that for a brief moment. Watching Sophie laugh across the dinner table, she'd felt something like longing for a different life. Instead, she pulled out the clothes Marcus had given her. A warm hoodie, thick socks, gloves. "Who needs these most tonight?" she asked, holding them up. Marcus sat in the dimly lit corner of the clubhouse, nursing a beer that had gone warm in his hand. His eyes kept drifting to the hallway, or watching for movement. The girl, Lila, had been quiet all day, helping with small chores without complaint, but keeping to herself. Something about her didn't add up. Last night, she'd disappeared without a word. He'd checked her room early this morning to find the bed barely slept in, yet she'd returned before dawn, slipping back in like a shadow. No one else seemed to notice, but Marcus hadn't survived this long without paying attention to details. Sophie was already asleep, tucked safely in the room next to his. Doc had checked her over again today and said she was recovering well, thanks to Lila's quick thinking in the storm. That debt wasn't something Marcus took lightly. The clock on the wall ticked past 11 p.m. Right on cue, he caught a glimpse of movement. Lila's slim figure moving silently toward the back door, a small bundle clutched against her chest. Marcus waited until the door closed behind her before standing up. He grabbed his heavy leather jacket from the hook by the door. Heading out? Tank, one of his oldest friends in the club, looked up from cleaning his boots. "Got something to check on?" Marcus replied, keeping his tone casual. "Won't be long." Outside, the night air hit his face with bitter cold. He spotted Lila already at the edge of the property, moving with purpose. For someone who claimed to be unfamiliar with the area, she navigated the dark streets with surprising confidence. Marcus followed at a distance, his boots making almost no sound on the frozen ground. Years of watching his back had taught him how to move quietly, even for a big man. He stayed in the shadows, keeping her slim figure in sight as she wound her way through side streets and abandoned lots. The girl moved with caution, stopping periodically to look around, not like someone taking a casual walk, but like someone who expected trouble. The kind of vigilance that came from hard experience. After nearly 30 minutes of walking, they reached the old industrial district. Marcus hung back further now, where the streetlights gave way to darkness. This part of town had been dead for years, the perfect place for those who didn't want to be found. He watched as Lila approached an abandoned factory building, slipping through a hole in the fence with practiced ease. The way she moved told him this wasn't her first visit. When she disappeared inside through what looked like a chained door, Marcus waited, counting to 60 before approaching. But the fence was a challenge for a man his size, but he found a section that had been pushed down enough to step over. He moved closer to the building, noticing how the chains on the door were arranged to look secure while actually allowing entry. Clever. Rather than announce his presence, Marcus found a broken window on the side of the building. He carefully pulled himself up to peer inside, mindful not to make noise on the broken glass. The scene inside made his breath catch. The cavernous space was lit by a couple of candles and a small portable lamp. In that dim light, he could make out a group of kids, teenagers, from what he could tell, huddled in a circle around Lila. She was unwrapping what looked like food, breaking it into pieces and distributing it carefully to each of them. Their faces, illuminated by the weak light, showed a mixture of hunger and relief. They were rail-thin, dressed in layers of dirty clothes, with the haunted look of those who'd seen too much too young. Some looked barely into their teens. "Small bites," he heard Lila say, her voice carrying in the empty space. "There's enough for everyone." Marcus watched as she handed out not just food, but other items, what looked like clean socks, a scarf, some medicine. With each item, she seemed to consider carefully who needed it most. "How's your cough, Mia?" Lila asked a small girl with tangled hair. "Better," the child replied, though her voice sounded raspy. "Take these anyway." Lila pressed 2 pills into the girl's hand. "Last of the cough medicine." One of the boys spoke up. "What about you? Did you eat today?" Marcus saw Lila nod. "I told you, they fed me. I'm good. But even from his vantage point, Marcus could see her divide her own portion, sliding half toward a skinny boy who had finished his food too quickly. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. The food she'd been taking wasn't for herself. It was for these kids. While he'd been suspecting her of God knows what, she'd been walking miles in the freezing cold to feed children even worse off than herself. Children who clearly depended on her. Marcus stepped back from the window, a strange feeling tightening his chest. In his world, people took what they wanted and protected their own. But this girl, this skinny, half-starved teenager who had nothing, was giving away the little she had. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows of the clubhouse kitchen. Lila stood at the counter, carefully wrapping leftover biscuits in a paper napkin, when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She quickly stuffed the food into her pocket and turned around. Marcus stood in the doorway, his large frame blocking the exit. His face remained calm, but his eyes held knowledge that made Lila's stomach tighten. "Coffee?" he asked, nodding toward the pot on the stove. Lila shook her head. "No thanks." Marcus poured himself a cup and settled into a chair at the small kitchen table. He took a slow sip before speaking. "You sleep okay?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Fine," Lila said, edging towards the doorway. "Sit down for a minute," Marcus said. It wasn't quite a command, but the authority in his voice was clear. Lila hesitated, then slid into the chair across from him. Her eyes darted to the clock on the wall, to the door, to the window, anywhere but at the man in front of her. "I followed you last night," Marcus said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Lila's hands curled into fists under the table, her body tensing for whatever came next. She'd been caught. Now everything would fall apart, just when those kids needed her most. "I'm not mad," Marcus added, noticing the fear in her eyes. "Actually, I'm impressed." Lila looked up at him then, confusion replacing fear. "What?" "Those kids at the factory," Marcus continued. "You've been looking after them." "They don't have anyone else," Lila said quietly, her voice stronger now. "I can't just leave them." Marcus nodded slowly. "How long?" "I met them about a month ago. There were only 3 at first. Now there's 8. Lila's eyes narrowed slightly. "If you're going to tell me to stop—" "I'm not." Marcus set his cup down firmly. "But walking miles in this weather carrying just scraps, it's not enough." "It's better than nothing," Lila shot back, a protective edge creeping into her voice. "That little girl with the cough, Mia, right? She needs real medicine, and all of them need more than leftovers." Lila's shoulders slumped slightly. "You think I don't know that? I do what I can." For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the kitchen clock and the distant voices of the club members in other rooms. "Why do you care?" Lila finally asked, suspicion evident in her tone. Marcus ran a hand over his beard, his expression thoughtful. "Let's just say I know what it's like to have nobody give a damn about you at that age." He stood up suddenly and walked to the refrigerator. Opening it, he began pulling out containers of food, leftover chicken, bread, cheese, fruit. He placed them on the counter, then reached into a cabinet for a large paper bag. "What are you doing?" Lila asked, watching him pile the food into the bag. "Helping," Marcus said simply. "This will feed them better than scraps." Lila stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on the growing pile of food. "Why would you help us?" Marcus paused, then turned to face her fully. "You saved my daughter's life, but it's more than that. Those kids need someone watching their backs, and you've been doing it all alone." He pushed the now full bag across the counter toward her. My crew and I, we have resources. Food, but blankets, medicine. Real medicine, not just whatever you can scrape together. Lila stared at the bag, then back at Marcus. Her expression wavered between hope and suspicion. "What's the catch?" she asked finally. "Nobody just helps for nothing." "No catch," Marcus replied, his voice softer than Lila had ever heard it. "Sophie talks about you like you're some kind of guardian angel. Turns out she wasn't far off." Lila's hand hovered over the bag, not quite touching it. "I don't know." "Look," Marcus said, "I'm not asking you to trust me completely. Just let me help those kids. They deserve better than scraps, and you deserve some backup." Lila's fingers curled around the edge of the bag, but she didn't pick it up. The offer hung between them. Help, safety, resources beyond what she could provide alone. When but years on the street had taught her that nothing came without strings. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Those kids trust me. I can't just bring someone new into their lives without being sure." Marcus nodded, respecting her caution. "Fair enough. The offer stands whenever you're ready." Lila stood by the clubhouse window, watching as Marcus made a series of phone calls. His voice carried through the thin walls, firm, authoritative, but with a new purpose that surprised her. He paced the gravel lot outside, gesturing with his free hand as he spoke. "Yeah, the old storage building by Miller Street," he was saying. "I need it cleared and cleaned by tonight." Sophie appeared beside Lila, her small hand slipping into Lila's. The girl's face still showed faint bruises from the accident, but her eyes were bright with curiosity. "What's my dad doing?" she asked. Lila squeezed her hand gently. "I think he's trying to help some people." "Because of you?" Sophie looked up, her expression knowing beyond her years. "I don't know about that," Lila murmured, but the truth was unmistakable. Something had shifted in Marcus since their morning conversation. By noon, the clubhouse buzzed with activity. 3 burly men in leather jackets carried boxes of blankets and clothes to a van outside. A woman with bright red hair and tattoo-covered arms sorted through medical supplies on the kitchen table. "Antibiotics, cold medicine, bandages," the woman said, pointing to each pile. "Tell me what else those kids need, and I'll get it." Lila stared at her. "How did you—" "Marcus told me," the woman replied with a small smile. I'm Darlene. Used to be a nurse before." She gestured vaguely at her biker gear. "Let's just say life took a different turn." More supplies appeared throughout the day. Food, toiletries, even a stack of paperback books and board games. Lila watched it all with growing amazement, unable to process how quickly things were moving. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus approached her, keys jangling in his hand. "Ready to see the place?" he asked. Lila hesitated. "The kids don't know about any of this. They might run if strangers show up." Marcus nodded. "That's why we're going first. You check it out, and if it works, you bring them yourself. No surprises." The drive took less than 15 minutes. They pulled up to a brick building that had once been a storage facility. From the outside, it looked abandoned and unremarkable. Exactly the kind of place that wouldn't draw attention. Inside was a different story. A team of people worked efficiently, sweeping floors, setting up partitioned areas with sheets hung from the clotheslines, and arranging mattresses and sleeping bags in neat rows. "Bathroom's there," Marcus pointed to a door. "Got the water turned back on this morning. Shower too." Lila walked slowly through the space, taking it all in. A small kitchen area had been set up in one corner, complete with a microwave, hot plate, and mini refrigerator. Another area held folding tables and chairs. Someone had even hung string lights across the ceiling, casting a warm glow that softened the industrial space. The back entrance is hidden from the street, Marcus explained as they continued the tour. Or anyone comes looking who shouldn't. We'll know before they get close. We, Lila asked. My people will take shifts keeping watch. No one gets in who isn't supposed to. Lila stopped in the middle of the room, overwhelmed. Why are you doing all this, really? Marcus was quiet for a moment. When Sophie said her dad would come for her, she believed it with everything she had. His voice grew rough. I wasn't there when the accident happened. I was off doing club business, and my little girl nearly died. He looked around at the shelter taking shape. These kids, they don't have anyone who'll come looking. No one who puts them first. His eyes met Lila's. Except you. Lila turned away, unable to handle the weight of his gaze. Instead, she walked to a window and looked out at the quiet street beyond. Behind her, though the transformation continued, people called out to each other, asking for tools or help moving furniture. The hollow building was filling with life and possibility with each passing minute. It was everything she had wished she could provide for the teens: safety, comfort, basic necessities. Yet something twisted uncomfortably in her chest as she watched. For months, she had been their protector, their provider. She had found them one by one, earned their trust bit by bit. Now strangers were swooping in with resources she could never hope to match. What would her role be now? Would the teens still need her when they had all this? Lila pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window, caught between gratitude for the help and fear of becoming unnecessary to the only people who made her feel needed. Aunt Shadows stretched across the street as Lila led the small group through quiet back streets toward the building. She'd gone back alone to gather them, just as she'd insisted to Marcus. Trust was fragile among these kids, a lesson they'd all learned the hard way. How much further? Asked Denny, the youngest at 14. His thin frame shivered despite the layers of mismatched clothes. Almost there, Lila answered, checking over her shoulder. 5 teens followed her. Denny, the twins Maya and Mia, tall and quiet Trev, and Ash with her bright blue hair growing out to show dark roots. And you're sure this place is legit? Ash's voice carried the skepticism they all felt. Some biker dude just hands over a whole building because you helped his kid. Lila nodded. I know it sounds crazy. Sounds like a trap, Trev muttered. No, it's not. Lila stopped walking and turned to face them. I wouldn't bring you there if I wasn't sure. You know that. They exchanged glances, the silent communication of those who'd learned to read danger in the smallest signs. Finally, Maya spoke up. We trust you, Lila. You've never steered us wrong. The old storage building looked ordinary from outside. Brick walls with few windows, nothing to suggest what waited inside. Lila led them to the back entrance, just as Marcus had shown her. Ready? She asked, hand on the door. 5 nervous nods answered her. She pushed the door open. Warm light spilled out, along with the smell of something cooking. Lila stepped aside to let them enter first, watching their faces transform from wariness to disbelief. What the? Denny whispered, stepping into the large open space, when the shelter looked even better than it had earlier. The partitioned sleeping areas now had colorful blankets and pillows. The kitchen corner bustled with activity. Darlene stirred something in a large pot while another woman arranged bread on plates. Marcus stood in the center, looking almost as uncomfortable as the teens, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. Hey, he said gruffly. Food's almost ready. For a long moment, no one moved. The teens huddled near the door, unsure what to make of this unexpected gift. Lila gently nudged Denny forward. It's okay, she said softly. Check it out. Slowly, cautiously, they began to explore. The twins stuck together, touching everything as if to confirm it was real. The clean blankets, the small heaters, the stack of towels by the bathroom door. Trev circled the perimeter, not noting exits and hiding places out of habit. Ash drifted toward the kitchen, drawn by the smell of food. "That smells amazing," she admitted reluctantly. Darlene smiled. "Beef stew. Nothing fancy, but it'll warm you up." "There's hot chocolate, too," the other woman added, pointing to a thermos. Denny's eyes widened. "For real?" "For real," Marcus confirmed. He gestured around the room. "This is your space now. No strings, no questions. Just a safe place." The twins exchanged glances. "Why would you do this for us?" Mia asked, voicing what they all wondered. Marcus looked at Lila. "Because someone showed me what matters." Lila felt her cheeks warm under his gaze, and the curious looks from the teens. Before anyone could question further, Darlene announced dinner was ready, or the tension began to melt as they gathered around the folding tables. Bowls of steaming stew were passed around, along with thick slices of bread. For kids who lived on whatever they could scrounge, it was a feast. At first, they ate in silence, focused on filling empty stomachs. But gradually, conversation sparked. Denny discovered a stack of comic books and excitedly showed Maya his favorites. Ash questioned Darlene about her tattoos. Even Trev relaxed enough to accept seconds when offered. Lila sat slightly apart, watching it all unfold. She'd spent months trying to keep them safe, warm, fed, scraping together just enough to keep them alive. And now, in a single day, they had more security than she'd been able to provide in all that time. A burst of laughter drew her attention. Denny was acting out some story, on arms waving dramatically while the others grinned. Real laughter, not the forced kind they sometimes use to push away fear, but genuine joy. Marcus approached quietly, offering her a steaming mug. "You should eat too." "I will," she promised, accepting the drink. "Just taking it all in." He followed her gaze to the group. "They seem good, tough kids." "They are," she agreed. "They've been through a lot." For a moment they watched in companionable silence as the teens continued eating, talking, existing in this moment of safety. The knot that had been tight in Lila's chest all day began to loosen. This was what she'd always wanted for them. Not just survival, but a chance to remember what being kids felt like. To laugh without looking over their shoulders. To sleep without one eye open. Despite her earlier fears, Lila felt the corners of her mouth lift into a small, genuine smile. Whatever happened tomorrow, tonight they were warm, fed, and together. Tonight, they were safe. And that was enough to be happy about. The morning light filtered through the few small windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the concrete floor. Lila had been awake for hours already, unable to break the habit of rising before dawn. She'd spent the quiet time organizing supplies and making mental lists of what they still needed. When the others began to stir, she already had water heating for tea and oatmeal bubbling in a large pot. The teens emerged from their sleeping areas one by one, bleary-eyed, but rested in a way Lila hadn't seen in months. "Morning," she greeted each of them quietly. Denny rubbed his eyes and looked around as if making sure yesterday hadn't been a dream. "We really slept here all night?" "We really did," Lila confirmed, handing him a steaming bowl. "Eat up." The front door opened, and Lila tensed briefly before recognizing Marcus's broad frame. Behind him trailed his daughter, Sophie, looking much healthier than when Lila had dragged her through the snow. The girl's brown eyes lit up when she spotted Lila. "Hi," Sophie called, breaking away from her father and rushing over. "Dad said I could help today." Lila glanced at Marcus, who nodded. "If that's okay with you," he added. "Sure," Lila said, surprised. "We've got plenty to do." Sophie beamed. "Dad brought more stuff too." She gestured to the boxes Marcus was carrying. For the next hour, the shelter buzzed with activity, but Lila directed the teens in setting up a proper storage system while Marcus installed better locks on the doors. Sophie shadowed Lila, eager to help with whatever task was at hand. "Is this where you'll sleep?" Sophie asked, pointing to a corner where Lila had stacked some supplies. Lila paused. "I haven't really figured that out yet. But you're staying, right?" The worry in Sophie's voice caught Lila off guard. "Dad said you might not." Lila busied herself with folding blankets. "I need to be able to move around, check on things." "But you saved me," Sophie said simply. "And you're helping all these kids. You should have a place too." Before Lila could respond, Marcus called Sophie over to help unpack some books he'd brought. Lila watched them together. The gentle way he spoke to his daughter. How carefully he listened when she talked. It was hard to reconcile this Marcus with the intimidating biker who'd stormed into the shack days ago. Around midday, the teens organized a cleaning rotation and began tackling different areas of the shelter. Lila found herself working alongside Sophie to sort through donated clothes. "How old are you?" Sophie asked, carefully folding a sweater. 17, Lila replied. "That's not much older than me. I'm 12. Sophie looked up at her. "How come you don't have a home?" The directness of children never ceased to surprise Lila. "It's complicated. Dad says that when he doesn't want to explain stuff." Sophie grinned. "But he always tells me eventually if I keep asking." Despite herself, Lila smiled. "Smart strategy." "So will you tell me?" Lila sighed. "Sometimes families don't work out the way they're supposed to." Sophie nodded seriously. "Like my mom. She left when I was little." "I'm sorry." "It's okay. Dad says sometimes people can only take care of themselves, not other people too." Sophie shrugged with the resilience of youth. "Is that what happened to you?" Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. When they finished with the clothes, Sophie tugged at Lila's sleeve. "Come see something." Curious, Lila followed her to a small alcove near the back of the building. Someone had cleaned it thoroughly and set up a simple bed, a shelf, and a chair. A curtain hung from a rod, ready to be pulled for privacy. "Dad and I made this for you," Sophie announced proudly. "It's not very big, but Dad said you'd want to be able to see everything from here." Lila stared at the small space. It was thoughtfully arranged, the bed positioned so she could see the main room, a hook for her backpack, even a tiny lamp on the shelf. "You don't have to use it," Marcus said, appearing behind them, "but it's here if you want it." Lila ran her fingers over the clean blanket. For so long, she'd avoided anything that felt permanent. Permanent meant vulnerable. Permanent meant it would hurt more when it inevitably ended. But looking at Sophie's hopeful face and the teens settling into the shelter beyond, something shifted inside her. Maybe having a place didn't mean being trapped. Maybe it meant having somewhere to return to. "Thank you," she said quietly, setting her backpack on the hook. "It's perfect." Later that afternoon, while Lila helped the teens arrange the communal eating area, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, recognizing the number of an old contact from his club. Stepping outside into the crisp air, he answered with a gruff, "Yeah?" "Got that info you asked for," came the gravelly voice of Deke, one of his most trusted sources. About the wreck. Marcus moved farther from the building, making sure he was out of earshot. The cold bit at his exposed skin, but he barely noticed. What did you find? It ain't good, brother. There was a pause, the sound of papers shuffling. That wasn't no accident. Brake lines were cut. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He steadied himself against the wall, his mind racing. You sure? Mechanic who towed it is an old friend. Called me the minute he got under there. Deke's voice lowered. This wasn't random, Marcus. Someone knew exactly where you'd be and when. A muscle in Marcus's jaw twitched as he stared out at the street, seeing nothing. Sophie had been alone in that car, if Lila hadn't found her. There's more, Deke continued. Got word that Flynn's crew has been asking around about you lately. Real specific questions, too. Flynn. The name alone made Marcus's blood run cold. They had history. Bad blood that went back years. But Marcus thought their truce was holding. Flynn wouldn't go after Sophie, Marcus said, though doubt crept into his voice. Even he wouldn't cross that line. Maybe not directly, but he's got new guys now, hungry ones looking to make their mark. Deke sighed heavily. All I'm saying is watch your back. And your kids. Thanks for the heads up. Marcus ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket, his thoughts churning. The shelter door opened, and Sophie bounded out, her cheeks pink with excitement. Dad, come see what we made. Marcus forced a smile, pushing down the rage and fear threatening to overwhelm him. Be right there, Princess. Sophie beamed and ducked back inside. Marcus took a deep breath of the cold air, trying to clear his head. If someone was targeting him through Sophie, everyone at the shelter could be in danger, especially Lila. When he went back inside, the main room had been transformed. The teens had arranged tables and chairs in a neat formation. Someone had found tablecloths from somewhere, and Sophie was carefully placing handmade paper flowers in the center of each table. Lila stood nearby, directing the final touches with quiet authority. Her eyes met his across the room, and something in his expression must have given him away because her smile faltered. Everything okay? She asked when he approached. Just club business, he said dismissively, though the lie felt heavy. Place looks great. Lila studied him for a moment longer before nodding. It was Sophie's idea. She said family dinners need a proper table. The word family struck him oddly, making his concern sharper. These kids, this shelter, they were becoming something important, something worth protecting. Dad, sit here. Sophie patted the chair beside her. We're going to have a real dinner tonight, all together. As Marcus joined his daughter, he watched Lila move among the teens, helping a younger boy fold napkins, showing a girl how to properly set a place. In just days, she had created something here, a sense of security these kids hadn't known in months, maybe years. If he told her about the sabotage, about Flynn and the danger, she would bolt. He knew her type, fiercely protective, willing to disappear if it meant keeping others safe. And the teens would lose their steady anchor, the person they were just beginning to trust. Sophie leaned against his arm, chattering about their dinner plans. Over her head, he caught sight of Lila laughing at something one of the teens said, a rare, unguarded moment that transformed her face. No, Marcus decided firmly. He wouldn't tell Lila, not yet. He had connections, resources. He could handle Flynn and his crew quietly, increase security around the shelter without raising alarms. But for the first time in his life, Marcus found himself responsible for more than just his daughter and his club brothers. These kids, this shelter, and Lila especially, they were under his protection now. He would deal with the threat himself. The shelter would remain a haven, at least for now. Night fell over the shelter, bringing a blanket of quiet as the teens settled into their beds. Marcus sat at a small desk in the back office, a single lamp illuminating the scattered papers before him. Photos of the wrecked car, mechanical diagrams, and handwritten notes covered the surface. His phone sat beside him, still warm from the hours of calls he'd been making. With everyone asleep, he could finally piece together what he'd learned. The evidence was unmistakable. This wasn't just brake tampering. It was professional work, on the kind done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Marcus rubbed his tired eyes. He'd called in every favor, pressed every contact. One by one, they confirmed his worst fears. The crash hadn't been a random act of violence or even simple revenge. It had been a calculated kidnapping attempt. "Flynn, you son of a gun," he muttered, studying a grainy surveillance photo his contact had sent over. It showed two men filling up at a gas station just miles from where Sophie's car crashed, known associates of Flynn's crew. He picked up the police report he'd gotten through a friend in the department. The officer had noted something odd. A second vehicle had been at the scene, but left before emergency services arrived. Tire tracks showed it had pulled up directly behind Sophie's car before driving away. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. They hadn't expected the crash to be so severe. They'd planned to take Sophie right there on that lonely stretch of road. His phone buzzed with a text from Deke. "Found the van. Abandoned outside of town. Zip ties, blankets inside." The confirmation hit him like a punch to the gut. Everything matched a professional grab job. Take Sophie, use her as leverage against him. Classic intimidation tactics. But why? The truce with Flynn had held for years. Marcus had even stepped back from some of the club's more questionable activities, focusing instead on legitimate business. What could Flynn possibly want badly enough to risk breaking their peace? Marcus flipped through his notes until he found what he was looking for. A rumor about Flynn expanding into new territory. The territory that bordered on Marcus's. Territory that contained a shipping route Marcus controlled. It made sick sense now. Take Sophie. Force Marcus to sign over the route. Establish dominance in one clean move. Flynn wouldn't have hurt her, not immediately. He wasn't that stupid. But he would have used her fear to break Marcus. A floorboard creaked outside the office. Marcus quickly gathered the papers, shoving them into a folder as the door eased open. Lila stood in the doorway, her thin frame silhouetted against the hallway's dim light. "Sorry," she said. "I saw the light on." "Just finishing up some business," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. "You should get some rest." She lingered, studying him with that perceptive gaze that seemed to see right through him. "Sophie told me about the accident, and said she was driving back from her grandmother's house?" Marcus nodded stiffly, thinking carefully about what to share. "That's right." "The road she took, it's not the main highway, is it?" Lila asked. "No," Marcus said slowly. "It's a back road. Faster, but not many people know about it. Someone would have to know she was coming that way." Lila's eyes didn't waver. "To plan anything." The realization struck Marcus with sudden clarity. Lila had already figured out more than he'd intended to share. This girl didn't miss much. "What are you saying?" he asked carefully. Lila stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "I've seen enough on the streets to know when something isn't right. The way your friends watch the building. The extra locks you installed, yet you're worried about something specific." Marcus weighed his options. Lying would be easier, but something told him Lila deserved better than that. "When you found Sophie," he said finally, "you didn't just save her from the cold. You interrupted something much worse." Understanding dawned on Lila's face. "They were coming back for her." Marcus nodded grimly. "And now they know someone interfered. Someone who might have seen them." The color drained from Lila's face as the implication became clear. Her presence, her heroic action, had disrupted a carefully orchestrated plan. And people like Flynn didn't forgive interference. "I've put everyone here in danger," she whispered. Morning light streamed through the windows of the shelter's small kitchen. But the teens had already eaten breakfast and scattered to various activities, some working on homework at the tables, others helping clean up. The normal buzz of conversation filled the room, but Lila barely noticed it. Her mind kept replaying last night's conversation with Marcus. Marcus entered the kitchen, nodding at her. "Got a minute?" he asked quietly. Lila followed him outside to the small, fenced yard behind the building. A few plastic chairs sat in a corner where they could talk privately. The air was crisp but not bitterly cold, a rare, pleasant day after weeks of harsh weather. "I need to tell you everything," Marcus said, settling into one of the chairs. His face looked older today, the lines around his eyes deeper. "You deserve to know what we're dealing with." Lila sat across from him, her back straight, bracing herself. "Because of what I saw at the accident. Because you're part of this now, whether either of us wanted that or not." Marcus rubbed his hands together, collecting his thoughts. "A man named Flynn has been trying to take over some of my business interests, legitimate ones," he added quickly. "I've got shipping routes I've built up over the years, legal stuff." "And Sophie was what? Leverage?" Lila asked, her voice tight. Marcus nodded grimly. "They tampered with her brakes, planning to grab her when the car stopped. They didn't expect the crash to be so bad. When you found her and took her somewhere else, you messed up their timeline." Lila's stomach twisted. "How do you know all this?" "I've been making calls, pulling in favors. Found the van they planned to use abandoned outside town. They had everything ready, zip ties, no blankets to keep her quiet." Lila wrapped her arms around herself. The pleasant morning suddenly felt much colder. "So these people, they know someone interfered. They know someone found Sophie before they could get back to the scene. They've been asking questions around town." Marcus leaned forward, his voice low but intense. "I've got men watching this place, but Flynn has people too. It's only a matter of time before they figure out who you are." "What about the other kids here?" Lila asked, glancing toward the building. "Are they in danger too?" "I won't lie to you. Flynn doesn't care about collateral damage." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I've started making arrangements to move everyone to a safer location, but it takes time to set things up properly." Lila stood up abruptly, pacing the small yard, or her mind raced with horrifying possibilities. "This is my fault. If I hadn't brought them here—" "You saved my daughter's life," Marcus interrupted firmly. "None of this is on you." But Lila barely heard him. She thought of 14-year-old Zach with his quiet smile, 12-year-old Danny, who still had nightmares about her abusive home, 16-year-old Miguel, who was finally catching up on his schoolwork. All of them finally feeling safe. All of them now in danger because of her. "How long until we can move everyone?" she asked, her voice hollow. 3 days, maybe 4. I've got a place lined up about 100 miles north. Former church camp with cabins, security system, everything we need." Marcus stood up too, watching her face carefully. "We'll get through this, Lila. My crew is solid. No one's getting past us." Lila nodded. But inside, something had already shifted. She knew what these kinds of men were capable of. She'd seen it on the streets. If they wanted to find her badly enough, they would. And everyone around her would suffer. "I need some air," she said suddenly. "I'm going to check on the corner store for supplies." Marcus frowned. "Take someone with you." "Just to the end of the block," she insisted. "I'll be quick." He reluctantly agreed, and Lila went inside to grab her coat. As she passed through the main room, she paused, watching the teens. They were laughing, doing homework, rebuilding their lives. For the first time in years, they had stability, safety, a chance. She couldn't be the reason they lost it all. In her room, Lila packed her few belongings into her backpack with shaking hands. But a note would be too risky. Marcus might try to find her. Better to disappear cleanly, drawing the danger away from the shelter. Away from Sophie, from the teens, from this fragile family they'd begun to build. The weight of what she had to do settled on her shoulders as she zipped up her backpack. It was the right choice. The only choice. She had to leave, disappear back into the streets, become a ghost again. Maybe Flynn's men would follow her trail away from here. It was the kindest gift she could give them all. The shelter fell quiet around midnight. Lila lay awake in her small room, listening to the building settle. The sound of Marcus checking the locks one final time echoed down the hall, followed by his heavy footsteps retreating to his own quarters. She waited another 30 minutes, counting each second, as making sure everyone was truly asleep. When the silence felt complete, Lila slipped from beneath her blankets, already fully dressed. Her backpack sat ready by the door, containing everything she owned in the world. A spare shirt, a thin paperback book, a toothbrush, and the small wooden bird Sophie had carved for her last week. She almost left the carving behind, knowing it would hurt too much to keep. But in the end, she couldn't bear to part with it. The floorboard outside her door creaked slightly as she stepped into the hallway. She froze, heart pounding, but no doors opened. Moving like a shadow, Lila made her way through the shelter. She paused briefly at Sophie's door, placing her palm flat against the wood. The girl was finally sleeping through the night again, no longer waking with nightmares about the crash. "To stay safe," Lila whispered, so softly it was barely a breath. In the main room, she crept past the sleeping forms of teens who had chosen to crash on the couches rather than take rooms. Miguel snored softly, one arm flung over his eyes. Danny was curled into a tight ball under 2 blankets. They looked peaceful, these kids who had known so little peace. They would be okay without her. Better than okay. They would be safe. The night air hit her face like a slap when she slipped out the side door. Winter still had its claws in the city, though spring wasn't far off. Lila pulled her jacket tighter and started walking, staying close to buildings, avoiding streetlights. Every shadow made her jump, imagining Flynn's men lurking, watching. But the streets remained empty. She walked for nearly an hour, doubling back occasionally to make sure she wasn't followed. Eventually, she reached the industrial district, where empty warehouses stood like sleeping giants. The abandoned bus station appeared ahead, its broken sign hanging at an angle. It felt strange returning here after everything that had happened. Had it really been just weeks ago that she'd huddled on that bench, alone and frozen? The station looked smaller somehow, sadder. The scent of mildew and old cigarettes welcomed her back like an unwanted embrace. "Home, sweet home," she muttered, her voice echoing in the empty space. Lila made her way to her old corner, where the bench sat against the wall. Someone else had clearly been using the spot. A crumpled fast food bag and empty beer bottles littered the floor. But they weren't here now. She swept the trash aside with her foot and sat down, backpack clutched to her chest. The silence pressed against her ears. After the constant hum of the shelter, voices talking, laughing, arguing, the sound of feet on stairs, doors opening and closing, the stillness felt wrong. Empty. Tears burned behind her eyes, but Lila blinked them away. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. She had to be strong, alert, smart. The streets demanded it. Unwrapping her thin blanket from her pack, she spread it on the hard bench. The wood felt even more unyielding than she remembered. Her body had grown used to a real bed, to warmth, to comfort. Now every muscle protested as she stretched out, using her backpack as a pillow. Above her, the station's old skylight revealed a patch of night sky. No stars were visible through the city's light pollution, just darkness. Lila stared up at it, remembering Sophie pointing out constellations from the shelter's backyard. The memory hurt. "This is where I belong," she whispered to herself. "This is all I deserve." The words felt like a mantra, something she needed to believe to keep going. She had brought danger to Marcus and the others. She couldn't risk their safety just because she'd gotten a taste of belonging. People like her didn't get homes or families. They got survival, nothing more. As the night deepened around her, Lila curled into herself, trying to conserve warmth. The station's drafts found every opening in her clothes, chilling her to the bone. But the cold on her skin was nothing compared to the ice forming around her heart. A necessary protection, a way to numb the pain of leaving. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, Lila lay awake, alone in the darkness, convinced this was the only place she truly belonged. The morning light filtered weakly through the shelter's windows as Marcus made his rounds. He'd slept fitfully, troubled by worries about Flynn's men and what their next move might be. Checking in on the kids had become his morning ritual, a quiet moment to reassure himself everyone was safe. He knocked softly on Sophie's door first. His daughter was already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed with a sketchbook. "Morning, Dad," she said, not looking up from her drawing. "Morning, sunshine." He leaned against the doorframe. "You sleep okay?" Sophie nodded, adding details to what looked like a bird. "Is Lila up yet? I wanted to show her this." "I'll check on her next," Marcus promised. He continued down the hall, stopping at Lila's door. He knocked once, then twice. No answer. Not unusual. The girl valued her privacy. "Lila, you awake?" he called softly. Silence greeted him. Something twisted in his gut, an instinct honed from years on the streets. He pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty. The bed was made, looking almost untouched. Marcus stepped inside, scanning the small space. The few clothes they'd given her were gone. The backpack that usually sat by the door was missing. "No," he whispered, his voice rough. "No, no, no." Marcus rushed back into the hallway. "Miguel!" he shouted, not caring who he woke. "Danny!" The teens appeared, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Miguel's hair stood in all directions. "Oh, what's happening?" Danny asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "Lila, when did you last see her?" Marcus demanded. They exchanged confused looks. "Last night at dinner," Miguel answered. "She seemed quiet." Marcus cursed under his breath. He should have seen this coming. After telling her about Flynn's threat, he should have known she'd try to protect them. By leaving. "Get everyone up. I need to know if anyone saw her go." His voice left no room for questions. Within minutes, the shelter was buzzing with worried voices. No one had seen Lila leave. No one knew where she might have gone. "I think I know," Sophie said quietly from the doorway of the common room. Everyone turned to look at her. She'd go back to where she started, the bus station. Marcus nodded. It made perfect sense. I'm going after her. Roy, you're in charge until I get back. No one leaves, understand? Roy, a veteran biker with silver-streaked beard, nodded solemnly. We'll lock down tight. Outside, the morning air carried a bitter chill. Marcus swung onto his motorcycle, its engine roaring to life. The sound echoed off the buildings like thunder. He tore through the streets, ignoring traffic lights, his mind fixed on finding Lila before she disappeared for good. The city blurred around him. How could he have let this happen? He'd promised to protect her, but instead, he'd scared her away with the truth. The thought of her alone again, thinking she had to face the world by herself, made something ache deep in his chest, a feeling he hadn't expected. When he reached the industrial district, Marcus slowed, scanning the area. When the abandoned bus station looked like a forgotten relic, its walls covered in graffiti, windows broken. He parked his bike and approached cautiously, not wanting to spook her if she was inside. The station door hung half open. Marcus stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. The place smelled of mold and neglect. How had she survived here before? The thought made his throat tight. Lila, he called out, his voice echoing through the empty space. A sudden movement caught his eye, a shadow shifting near the back wall. Marcus moved toward it and found Lila sitting upright on a bench, backpack clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide with surprise, then narrowed with determination. You shouldn't be here, she said, voice hoarse from the cold night. Go back to the shelter. Marcus stood his ground, studying her face. But dark circles shadowed her eyes. She looked small and impossibly young, wrapped in her thin jacket. Not without you, he said simply. I can't go back. Lila shook her head. I brought this danger to your door, to Sophie. I won't be responsible for someone else getting hurt. Marcus moved closer, sitting on the bench beside her, leaving enough space not to crowd her. You didn't bring anything. Flynn's had it out for me for years. This isn't on you. It doesn't matter. I need to go. But she didn't move, just gripped her backpack tighter. Look at me, Lila. Marcus waited until she reluctantly met his eyes. I've spent my life pushing people away, thinking I was protecting them. All I did was end up alone. He took a deep breath. You saved my daughter. You feed kids who have nothing. You give when you've got nothing to give. And now you think leaving is the answer? It's the only way, she whispered. No, it's the easy way. His voice grew gentle. The hard way is staying, fighting, building something worth protecting. Silence hung between them as Marcus's words echoed through the empty bus station. Outside, the sounds of the waking city, distant car horns, the rumble of delivery trucks, created a stark contrast to the stillness inside. Lila stared at the cracked concrete floor. You don't understand, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. People get hurt around me. They always have. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The leather of his jacket creaked with the movement. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied his weathered hands. When Sophie was 5, he began slowly, her mom left us, and packed a bag one morning and was gone by afternoon. No warning, no goodbye. He paused, swallowing hard. Sophie cried for weeks, asked what she did wrong. Lila glanced up, surprise visible in her tired eyes. I told myself I was protecting her by staying away, by letting my crew handle the day-to-day while I handled business. Truth was, I was scared of failing her like her mom did. His voice grew rough. By the time I figured out what mattered, I'd missed 3 years of her life. 3 years I'll never get back. A pigeon fluttered through a broken window, settling on a dusty beam above them. Its soft cooing filled the silence. Before you found Sophie in that car, Marcus continued, I was just going through motions, being feared, being respected. It stopped meaning anything a long time ago. He turned to face her directly. Then you came along. This skinny kid with nothing, giving everything, made me look hard at my life. Lila pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller on the bench. I'm not special, she mumbled. I just did what anyone would do. That's where you're wrong. Marcus shook his head. Most people would have walked away from that crash. Most people don't share their last scrap of food with strangers. Most people don't risk everything for kids they barely know. He gestured at the dilapidated station around them. You think coming back here is protecting us? It's not. It's giving up on something that matters, something real. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the floor. Lila's fingers worried at a loose thread on her sleeve. I spent 20 years building a reputation that made men cross the street when they saw me coming, Marcus said quietly. Know what it got me? Enemies, fear, and a daughter who barely knew me. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn photo. He handed it to Lila. It showed a younger Marcus, without the lines of worry around his eyes, holding a tiny, dark-haired girl. First day I held her, he explained. I promised her the world that day. Then I got lost trying to take it instead. Lila traced the edge of the photo with her finger before handing it back. When you saved Sophie, you didn't just save her life. You gave me a chance to keep that promise. Marcus carefully returned the photo to his pocket. Toss, you brought purpose back when I'd forgotten what it meant. A tear slipped down Lila's cheek before she could catch it. She wiped it away quickly, but Marcus had seen. Flynn and his crew, they're coming either way, he said, whether you're with us or not. Difference is, together, we stand a chance. I'm just one person, Lila said, her voice cracking. What can I do? You already did it. You showed us what family looks like. Marcus stood up, extending his hand to her. Real family sticks together, especially when things get tough. Lila stared at his outstretched hand. She thought of the shelter, of Sophie's bright smile, of Miguel's terrible jokes, of Danny's quiet strength. For the first time in years, she'd felt like she belonged somewhere. I'm scared, she admitted, the words catching in her throat. Me too, Marcus answered honestly. Been scared every day since Sophie was born. That's what caring does. Lila looked up at him, searching his face. The fierce, intimidating man who'd burst into the shack that snowy morning seemed different now. Still strong, but gentler somehow. I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me, she said, but her grip on the backpack had loosened. Then help us fight, Marcus said simply, but do it with us, not by running away. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, sending dusty beams of light through the cracked windows of the bus station. Lila was still considering Marcus's outstretched hand when a sound from outside caught their attention. Tires on gravel? Then silence. Marcus's posture changed instantly. His shoulders tensed, and his eyes narrowed as he motioned for Lila to stay quiet. Or he moved swiftly to the window, keeping his body pressed against the wall as he peered out. Black SUV, he whispered, his voice suddenly hard. Tinted windows. Nobody gets out. A chill ran down Lila's spine. How did they find us? They've been watching. Waiting. Marcus pulled back from the window, reaching inside his jacket. Just like I thought they would. The vehicle's engine continued to idle, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the abandoned building. Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. This wasn't just her imagination or paranoia anymore. The danger was real, and it was right outside. "That's Flynn's crew," Marcus said grimly. "They're not here for a friendly chat?" Another vehicle pulled up beside the first. A dark sedan with chrome rims. This time a man stepped out, tall and lean, with a scar running down the side of his neck. He surveyed the bus station, eyes hidden behind reflective sunglasses despite the early hour. "We need to move," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. He pulled out his phone, typed a quick message with one hand. "The crew is getting the kids to safety. Sophie, too." The scarred man gestured to the building, and another figure emerged from the SUV, carrying something that made Lila's blood run cold. The unmistakable shape of a gun, poorly concealed under a jacket. "This is what I was afraid of," she whispered, guilt washing over her. "I brought this to your door." Marcus turned to her, his eyes steady and clear. "No. This was coming long before you showed up. Flynn's had it out for me since I refused to let him use our routes for trafficking." His jaw tightened. "Gar, the crash wasn't random. Sophie was the target to get to me." The weight of this truth settled between them. Lila remembered the night of the blizzard, the car half buried in snow, the small, cold hand she had found inside. It hadn't been chance that brought her there. "The back exit's clear," Marcus said, checking another window. "We can make it to my bike if we move now." Lila stared at the floor, her mind racing. Running had been her survival strategy for so long. It was what kept her safe, what she knew best. Stay nowhere too long. Trust no one completely. Leave before they leave you. But something had changed. Standing in this broken-down station where she'd spent countless lonely nights, she realized she didn't want to run anymore. At least not alone. "If I come with you," she said slowly, looking up at Marcus. "What happens next? We can't just hide forever?" Outside, the men were moving closer to the station, checking the perimeter. Time was running out. "We face them," Marcus answered, his voice steady. "Together, with the crew, with the community we've built." He paused, then added, "I've spent my life intimidating people. Now I'm going to use that reputation for something that matters." A crash sounded as someone tested a boarded-up window. They were looking for a way in. "I'm tired of running," Lila admitted, her voice stronger than she expected. "Tired of leaving everything behind." Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. He reached out his hand again, and this time, Lila took it. "Let's go home," she said, standing up straighter than she had in months. Marcus squeezed her hand once, then led the way toward the back exit. As they slipped through the doorway into the alley behind the station, Lila didn't look back at the bench where she'd spent so many cold nights. She was done with that life. "I'm not running away," she told Marcus, as they hurried toward his motorcycle hidden behind a dumpster. "I'm running toward something this time." He smiled. A rare, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "That's what family does," he said. "They stand together." Marcus's motorcycle roared through the back streets, taking a deliberately winding path as Lila clung tightly to his leather jacket. They switched routes multiple times, doubling back and cutting through narrow alleys to ensure they weren't followed. When they finally arrived at the shelter, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The once peaceful haven now buzzed with purposeful activity. Marcus's crew members moved with quiet efficiency, their usual casual demeanor replaced by focused determination. Some stood watch at windows, while others moved furniture to create barricades. "They found us at the bus station," Marcus announced as they entered. Flynn's crew, just like we suspected. Dex, a broad-shouldered man with a salt and pepper beard, nodded grimly. We got your text. The kids are all in the back room with Sophie. Raj is with them. Lila scanned the main area, noticing how different everyone looked. The men she'd come to know over the past weeks, men who laughed and told jokes during dinner, who awkwardly helped teens with homework, now moved with the practiced precision of soldiers. "How did they know where to find us?" Lila asked, her voice small in the tense room. "They've been watching longer than we realized," Marcus replied, checking his phone. "But they made a mistake showing themselves. Now we know what we're up against." Lila followed Marcus to a back office, where maps of the neighborhood were spread across a table. Red markers indicated key points around the shelter, potential entry points, escape routes, and blind spots. "We've got 8 guys on rotation," said a lanky biker named Vince, pointing to various positions on the map. 2 on the roof, rest covering all entries. Chain links electrified now. No one gets in without us knowing. Marcus nodded, scanning the plans. "What about the teens?" "Ready to move at a moment's notice," Dex replied. "Each kid has a go bag and knows their evacuation buddy. And Safe House on Westridge is prepped." Lila watched in amazement as the room continued to fill with crew members, each reporting on different aspects of their defense. These weren't just random tough guys. This was an organized unit that clearly respected Marcus's leadership. "I want to help," Lila said suddenly, drawing everyone's attention. "I'm not just going to hide in the back." The room fell quiet. Marcus studied her face, then nodded slowly. "You know these kids better than anyone," he said. "They trust you. If we need to evacuate, they'll follow your lead without question. That's not a small thing." He gestured for her to join them at the map. "The evacuation route goes through here." He pointed to a narrow passage between buildings. "You'll take point with Raj if that call comes." Lila nodded, but feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. This wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about protecting something that mattered. After finalizing the plans, Marcus took Lila to see the teens. They were gathered in the large back room that normally served as their classroom and recreational space. Sophie sat among them, playing cards with 2 younger kids. The room had been transformed with blackout curtains and emergency supplies stacked neatly in corners. "How are they doing?" Lila asked Raj, a younger crew member with kind eyes who had taken on the role of the teens' primary guardian. "Scared, but hanging tough," he replied quietly. "They've been through worse, most of them." Lila understood that truth all too well. She approached the group and immediately felt several pairs of eyes turn to her questioningly. "What, is it true?" asked Maya, a 15-year-old with short cropped hair. "Are bad people coming here?" Lila sat down among them, choosing her words carefully. "Some people might try to cause trouble," she admitted, "but Marcus and his crew won't let anything happen to us." "Why do they want to hurt us?" asked a younger boy named Zach. "They don't," Lila explained. "They're after Marcus. But he's not running away, and neither are we. We're going to stick together just like we always have." Outside the room, the preparation continued. The sound of furniture moving, radios crackling with updates, and the occasional murmured order filtered through the walls. With each passing hour, the tension in the shelter grew thicker, everyone waiting for whatever would come next. Marcus appeared in the doorway, gesturing for Lila to join him in the hallway. "Flynn's men have been spotted 3 blocks away," he said quietly. "They're setting up, watching our movements. It won't be tonight, but they're getting ready." Lila nodded, surprising herself with her own calmness. "So are we." The night passed in tense vigilance. By dawn, Everyone moved with the gritty determination of those who hadn't slept. Lila helped distribute coffee to the lookouts, while Marcus checked in with each post by radio. "Movement on the north side," came a hushed voice through the static. 3 vehicles just pulled up, at least 8 men. Marcus's expression hardened. "Copy that. Hold positions." He turned to Lila, his eyes serious but steady. "It's happening. Let's get everyone ready." The teens huddled in the back room, backpacks at their feet. Tulila moved among them, squeezing shoulders and offering quiet reassurance. Though her own heart hammered in her chest, she kept her voice calm. "Remember what we practiced," she said. "Stay with your buddy. Follow Raj's signals if we need to move." A loud crash from the front of the building made everyone freeze. Marcus's voice carried through the shelter. "They're testing our defenses. Everyone stay calm." Lila watched Raj position himself at the escape door, hand ready on the lock, but not opening it yet. Outside, they could hear engines revving, followed by shouting. Then came a voice through a megaphone, cold and calculated. "Marcus, we know you're in there. Send out the girl who saw too much, and maybe we can talk this through like gentlemen." Lila felt her blood run cold. They were looking for her. She started toward the front, but Sophie caught her arm. "Don't even think about it," the woman whispered fiercely. Through the small window, Lila could see Marcus standing just inside the front door, flanked by 3 of his crew. His posture was relaxed but alert, like a coiled spring. "Flynn," Marcus called back, his voice carrying without shouting. "You got a funny way of asking for a conversation. Last I checked, gentlemen don't try to kidnap little girls." A harsh laugh came from outside. "That was business? This is too. That homeless kid interfered with something bigger than you understand." "That homeless kid," Marcus replied, "is under my protection now. So are all of them." Lila felt something warm spread through her chest despite the danger. No one had ever claimed her as their own before. A tense silence followed, that broken by the sound of someone kicking at the reinforced door. It held firm. "You can't hide in there forever," Flynn shouted. "And when you come out, we'll be waiting. Your little shelter project ends today." "I wouldn't count on that." The new voice came from somewhere outside, followed by the distinctive sound of multiple motorcycles arriving. Through the window, Lila saw surprise register on Marcus's face. "What is it?" she whispered to Sophie. "Reinforcements," Sophie replied, a smile spreading across her face. "Looks like Marcus's message got through." Outside, the balance of power was shifting. More motorcycles arrived, forming a perimeter around Flynn's vehicles. These weren't Marcus's crew. They wore different colors, represented different clubs. Marcus stepped outside, now flanked by over a dozen bikers. But Lila recognized some from neighboring clubs that Marcus had reached out to days earlier. The rivals who had once fought each other now stood shoulder to shoulder. "See, Flynn," Marcus called out, his voice strong and clear. "You messed with something bigger than you understood, too. This isn't just about me anymore." A tall woman with braided hair stepped forward from the new arrivals. "The East Side Riders stand with Marcus," she announced. "This shelter is protected territory now." Another man, heavily tattooed and imposing, joined her. "Same goes for the Road Kings. These kids are off limits." Flynn's men shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for the united front they now faced. What had been an easy show of force was quickly becoming an unwinnable confrontation. Flynn himself stepped forward, his face twisted with anger and disbelief. "Since when do you all play protector? This isn't what we do." "Maybe it's time that changed," Marcus replied simply. For several tense moments, nobody moved. The standoff balanced on a knife's edge. Then, with a disgusted wave, Flynn signaled to his men. "This isn't worth the trouble," he spat. "But I won't forget this, Marcus." "Neither will we," the woman from the East Side Riders replied coolly. As Flynn's vehicles pulled away, the United crews maintained their positions until they were completely gone. Only then did the shelter erupt in cheers and relieved laughter. Inside, the teens rushed to the windows, watching in awe as their defenders celebrated. Lila felt Maya slip a small hand into hers. "They came to protect us," the girl whispered, her voice full of wonder. "Was all of them?" Lila squeezed her hand. "Yes, they did." For the first time in her life, Lila understood what it truly meant to belong somewhere. It wasn't just about having a roof overhead, it was about being part of something larger than yourself, something worth defending. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the shelter, casting golden rectangles across the worn floorboards. The tension of yesterday had melted away, replaced by a buzzing energy as everyone went about their tasks with renewed purpose. The danger had passed, and for the first time, the future seemed bright with possibility rather than heavy with threat. Lila sorted through donated clothes, folding each item with care. She paused when she heard the rumble of motorcycles outside, not the threatening sound of yesterday, but the now familiar arrival of Marcus and his crew. The door swung open, and Marcus walked in carrying 2 large boxes, followed by members of his crew with more supplies. "Morning," he called out, nodding to Lila. "Got some good news?" The teens gathered around as Marcus set down his boxes. His presence had changed over the past weeks, still commanding respect, but now with a warmth that invited rather than intimidated. "The East Side Riders are sending over a contractor this afternoon," he announced, pulling out paperwork from his jacket. "Guy owes them a favor. He's going to fix the plumbing and heating properly." Cheers erupted from the group. Proper hot water had been a luxury they'd been managing without. "That's not all," Marcus continued. "Road Kings talked to the building owner. And we got a real lease now." He held up the papers. 2 years with option to renew. No more worrying about getting kicked out." Lila couldn't believe what she was hearing. "How did you manage that?" she asked. Marcus shrugged, but his eyes showed pride. "Turns out when 3 motorcycle clubs vouch for you, people listen. Plus, Sophie's cousin is a lawyer. She made it all official." Throughout the morning, Lila watched as Marcus moved from task to task, making phone calls, organizing schedules for volunteers, and mapping out plans for expanding their services. He'd transformed from a man who inspired fear to one who built security for others. After lunch, Marcus found Lila organizing the small library corner they'd created with donated books. "Got a minute?" he asked, gesturing toward the small office in the back. Inside, where he closed the door and took a deep breath. Something about his demeanor made Lila nervous. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," he said, leaning against the desk. "I just finished talking with my lawyer. He's drawing up guardianship papers." Lila's brow furrowed. "For one of the kids?" Marcus looked at her directly, his eyes serious but kind. "For you, Lila." The words hit her like a physical force. She stood frozen, unable to process what he was saying. "You're 17, Marcus continued gently. "Still a minor in the eyes of the law. Without legal guardianship, any official could come in and place you in foster care until you turn 18. I can't let that happen. Not after everything." Lila's throat felt tight. "You want to be my guardian?" "Only if you want that too." His voice was uncharacteristically uncertain. "You saved my daughter's life. You've changed how I see the world, and I hope, we've become something like family." Family. The word hung in the air between them. "What would it mean?" Lila asked quietly. "Practically speaking, Marcus straightened up. It means you'd have a legal home with me and Sophie. You'd finish school. We already looked into getting you enrolled. It means you'd have support, not just until you turn 18, but beyond that too. College, if you want it, or whatever path you choose. He paused, then added more softly. It also means you'd have people who care about what happens to you, who want to see you thrive, not just survive. Lila turned to the window, looking out at the shelter that had grown from her small acts of kindness into something permanent and real. Tears pricked at her eyes. I've never had that before, she whispered. Someone planning for my future. I know. Marcus's voice was gentle. And you deserve it more than anyone I've ever met. He stepped forward, close but not touching her, respecting the space she needed. You don't have to answer now, he said. Take all the time you need to think about it. But I want you to know that there's a place for you with us. Permanently, as family. Lila turned back from the window, her eyes meeting Marcus's. In them, she saw something she'd never expected to find in this life. Steady, unwavering acceptance. She moved to the small metal folding chair in the corner and sat down, needing the support as memories washed over her. Just months ago, she had been sleeping on that hard bench in the abandoned bus station, or with nothing but her worn backpack and survival instincts. Each day had been a fight, for food, for warmth, for the simple right to exist without being chased away. I used to count success in really small ways, she said quietly. Finding half a sandwich someone threw away, a dry spot during rain, a night without someone trying to steal my shoes. Marcus sat on the edge of the desk, listening intently. He didn't rush her or try to fill the silence. That night in the storm, she continued, when I found Sophie in that car, I wasn't trying to be a hero, She struggled for the words. I couldn't walk away, and I never expected anything to come from it. That's what makes it special, Marcus said. You did the right thing when no one was watching. Lila looked down at her hands. They were cleaner now, less rough than they had been weeks ago. Small changes, but they represented so much more. She thought about the teens who came to the shelter, how their faces had transformed from wary and hollow to hopeful, how they laughed more easily now, how they were making plans for tomorrow instead of just trying to survive today. I keep waiting for it all to disappear, she admitted, for someone to say there was a mistake, and I need to leave. Marcus nodded. I get that. Trust takes time, especially when life's taught you not to count on anything. But you keep showing up, Lila said, looking up at him. Every day, even when I ran away. That's what family does, Marcus replied simply. They don't give up on each other. The word family resonated in her chest. For so long, it had been a painful reminder of what she'd lost, or never truly had. Now it was being offered again, not as a fragile promise, but as something solid and real. She thought about Sophie, who had started calling her Big Sister last week. About the desk Marcus had helped her set up in the corner of the shelter office, where she'd begun studying for her GED. About the small room they'd prepared for her in their home, with actual curtains and a bookshelf. I've been afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid to want things, to hope for more. Being afraid doesn't mean you're weak, Marcus said. It means you're smart enough to know life can be hard, but you're also strong enough to take chances anyway. Lila stood up and walked to the bulletin board, where they'd pinned photos of the shelter's progress. There she was in several of them, helping serve food, reading to the younger teens, laughing with Sophie. Evidence of a life being built, moment by moment. I want to stay, she said finally, her voice growing stronger with each word. I want to finish school. I want to keep helping here. I want—" Her voice caught, but she pushed through. "I want to be part of this family." Marcus's face softened with relief and joy. "You already are, kid. The papers just make it official." He stepped forward, arms slightly open. An invitation, not a demand. Lila hesitated only briefly before stepping into his embrace. His arms wrapped around her protectively, and she felt herself relax into the unfamiliar but welcome feeling of safety. "Thank you," she whispered against his leather jacket. "For finding me. For not giving up." "Thank you," he replied, a voice gruff with emotion, "for showing me what courage really looks like." When they pulled apart, Lila wiped at her eyes, but didn't try to hide her tears. For the first time in years, they weren't tears of loss or fear. They were tears of belonging. "So," she said with a watery smile, "what happens now? I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day."